Welcome back to my channel for a Fuji GFX medium format episode. And you see here my Fuji GFX100 Mark II. And here you see, I would like to call it a monster lens. That's the Fujinon GF500mm and its widest open aperture is an f5.6. And the background of this video is the following. I recently posted a video about this lens and the Fuji GFX100 Mark II and my personal experience when shooting this camera lens combination on a tripod. And we were discussing whether optical image stabilization should be on, as Fuji is advising in the manual, or should be switched off. In my experience, you get blurry images if it is switched on. So on a tripod, I deactivate it, and this automatically also deactivates the in-body image stabilization in the GFX100 Mark II, which we all believe should be deactivated anyway if we shoot this camera on a tripod. And in the context of this video, I asked in a kind of sloppy way, would you guys care about a fully fledged review about this lens? And actually a lot of you dropped me a comment and said, yes, please do it. That's what this video now here is all about. Let's kick it off. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please do so, subscribe, hit the notification bell, support my work. Many thanks for that. All right, it is a monster lens, but it's astonishingly good in hand. And I just came back actually shooting this camera lens combination, and let me quickly explain. I use this camera lens combination typically for landscape photography with a perception of compression. And I posted on this effect which you can achieve when you shoot landscape images with telelenses in a video on the channel. And I'll post a link down below in the info box so you can look this up. But I thought if I restrict this video to landscape photography, a lot of people will be disappointed, because there will be for sure a whole bunch of people watching this video who expect actually to see some wildlife or bird photography. So just a moment ago, I came back. I went to Nice Kinderzoo. And Kinderzoo in English, I don't know. You have Kinder chocolate, right? So you might also know what Kinderzoo means, but it's a zoo with dedicated attractions for children. And this is in Rapperswil, is not too far from Zurich. And I paid 23 Swiss franc for the ticket for an adult. And I was indeed taking this camera lens combination to shoot some birds, to shoot some animals, getting in this way a little bit like a wildlife simulated shooting situation. So those of you who are not interested in landscape photography, or maybe only a bit interested in landscape photography, you also get some images about wildlife photography with this monster, and now I stop saying it, monster 500mm lens for the Fuji medium format system. Before we look into some of the settings and then of course in detail into sample images, what I achieved back then when I used it for landscape and today in the zoo, I want to share some of the specifications of the lens. And first of all, I told you it's really good in hand. And although it looks like a monster lens, it is actually not as heavy as it looks like. So the weight of this lens is 1,375 grams, which is not unusual for a telelens. And I actually have more heavy telelenses here in the studio. And that's why it's also pleasant to shoot it. As I said, it's really good in hand and sits very well on the camera body of the Fuji GFX100 Mark II. Of course, on a tripod, you use the tripod socket here. Let me show you. You can mount this here to a tripod in different screw sizes. And then the weight of the lens, these roughly 1,400 grams, will not put the lens mount on the camera body under stress. The optical construction of the lens is really on the more complex side. We talk here about 21 lens elements in 14 groups, and among these 21 elements, we have 2 Super ED and 5 ED elements. So the optical quality of this lens is beyond any doubt. And I mentioned, I think at the beginning, widest open aperture here is an f5.6. You have an aperture ring here with clicks. I don't know if you can hear it. Let me try. And widest open is an f5.6. You can stop this all the way down to an f32. You have an aperture automatic mode where the aperture is chosen by the camera. And you also have the C mode, and C typically stands, if I'm not mistaken, for control, and means you can also control the aperture via the control wheels on the camera body, namely here or here, for instance. And that's kind of what we get in terms of depth of field. Widest open f5.6. Now f5.6 combined with a 500mm telelens is quite powerful to separate the foreground from the background, and you will see this in the sample images later on. In terms of minimum focusing distance, we get quite some distance, which is what we should expect if we talk about a 500mm focal length. So the minimum focusing distance you need to adhere to is 2.75 meter. And I was tempted to say at the beginning up front, this lens is good for landscape, wildlife and product photography. And it might be good for product photography because its maximum magnification is 0.2 times, so 20%. But the minimum focusing distance of 2.75 meter, as just mentioned, puts you into quite a distance to your subject, which you want to put in scene. And I'm not so sure if this is really ideal for product photography if you have such a distance. Most of us think when we talk about product photography, likely about close-up photography, and that means going a bit closer to your subject, which you want to actually get captured by the frame you're aiming for. But you can, by the optical properties with an 0.2 times magnification, easily also use it for product photography, but you need to adhere to the 2.75 meter distance. The filter size is also reflecting the very interesting focal length we have here. Let me remove the lens cap. We talk about a filter thread of 95mm, and that is huge. So if you intend to shoot these lenses with filters, neutral density, polar filters, what have you, this will burn quite a hole into your wallet. The lens is fully weather sealed. You have a rubber sealing here on the lens mount so that the camera body is protected from potentially intruding water or liquids. You have a limiter switch here, full focus range. Then you have 5 meter to infinity. That helps you, if you know where your subject is sitting, to find focus quicker, and the focus is not hunting forth and back. You can activate and deactivate optical image stabilization. And whenever I'm not on a tripod, coming back to my video back then about OIS and IBIS and how this plays together in this camera lens combination, whenever I'm not on a tripod, I have OIS on. And this is one of the nice constellations where the optical image stabilization of the lens perfectly collaborates with the in-body image stabilization of the GFX100 Mark II. So you can actually shoot longer exposures, significantly longer exposures, handheld, with this camera lens combination. And I personally think for telelenses, it's almost mandatory to have optical image stabilization integrated. Having said that, if we talk about wildlife photography and catching birds in flight or animals in motion, then this is not useful, because what do you want to do with a long exposure? Everything will be blurry because the animal is moving. So you will very likely, as I did in the zoo a couple of hours ago, go in terms of shutter speed, and I show you later, to 1/400 seconds, 1/500 seconds, maybe even 1/1000 seconds to freeze potential motion of the animal you are trying to capture. On the lens barrel, we find 4 customizable function buttons. It's this one, there is one on the top, there is one at the bottom side and one on the other side. So depending on how you want to hold your camera, you can actually hold it here and can control this button here. And this is super convenient because there is always an imbalance where, you know, the whole camera lens combination tends to fall a little bit like this, although this very heavy socket here stabilizes this to some extent. But these are very convenient, and they are connected to another switch here, which I personally find pretty cool. Look at that. There are 3 settings here. There is autofocus, there is preset, and then there is autofocus lock. And that is, I think, a pretty sophisticated construction, which I want to quickly explain. In terms of focusing, let me get the camera in your field of view here. And look, there is Jennifer and she's blurry. Now I have pressed the shutter button and she gets sharp and in focus. And by the way, you heard me talking before about separation of foreground from background. Jennifer is only about 2 meters away from the watch image in the background, but the watch image is completely blurry. Let me show you the watch image. Here we go. And you see now Jennifer is blurry. Let's go back to Jennifer. And let's try to find focus. Here we go. It's a bit difficult to do this from behind the camera. And you see a very nice separation of foreground from background, which you will also see in the sample images. Now here's the catch. If this switch here is in the AF mode, you can also use these 4 buttons here on the lens barrel like an autofocus on button. And that is super convenient if you want to hold the camera like this. Look here. And let me quickly show you. Let me get this again here. And now I press one of these 4 buttons and the background is in focus. I come back to Jennifer and now Jennifer is in focus. You see that? And I was pressing with my thumb this customizable function button here. And that's what the setting AF is doing for you. Now, autofocus lock on the opposite side, that's 2 clicks away, is the mode where the focus is locked. While holding one of these buttons, it prevents the camera from changing focus and allowing you to recompose the shot. And that is what we do very often in photography if we want to recompose a scene. And then there is this ingenious preset here. And I like this a lot. And I think if this video out there is watched by bird photographers, you will love this function for sure. Because when you are in the preset function here, and you see here there is another button which is called set, you can actually program or store a certain focusing distance. And let me quickly illustrate this to you. So let's say here I have here Jennifer now. Oh, is this difficult from behind the camera with a camera lens combination of this weight. So here is Jennifer. Jennifer is now in focus. I remove my pointing finger from the shutter release button and press now set. So I pressed it and now this focusing distance to Jennifer is pre-programmed. And I show you how this works. Now I focus on the background on the watch and you see it found focus and Jennifer is blurry. And I keep my pointing finger off and away from the shutter release button. And now I press one of these function buttons here and it will get back the focus to Jennifer. Have a look. Now Jennifer is blurry. I push the button and it remembers in light speed where the focus was sitting on Jennifer. So that's the workflow you have. And the practical application is simple. Imagine you sitting somewhere, you know, camouflaged and having your camera on the nest of a bird. And then you focus with the camera, do all the settings, focus with the camera on the nest of the bird, get your aperture right, what have you. You go into preset mode, you set the focusing distance. And even if the focus is then in the moment when you want to take the shot somewhere else, you push one of these 4 buttons here on the lens barrel and immediately focus will jump back to the pre-programmed and assigned focusing distance to that bird nest. And that is super convenient. Let me show you once more because I think this is really well done by Fuji. So let me focus on the background. Here we see the watch. And now I press just this button here and you will see Jennifer is again sharp and in focus. Look here. And this is going in light speed. It's really, really quick. Once the camera knows in the preset state here that a certain focusing distance is what you want, you can anytime recall it via one of these 4 buttons. So that's what this switch here is doing. I think is a really cool solution, in particular for wildlife photography. I actually think in terms of mechanical elements on the lens, that's it. And what I want to quickly show you is the settings I used for my little excursion a moment ago into the zoo and shooting birds and getting my wildlife simulation quote unquote up and running. And of course, for landscape photography, I don't think there is that much to say. You're in standard settings. You do the same as what you do with any other camera lens combination when you go for landscape photography. And I don't think I should waste your time on this one. But I want to show you by means of an example, namely bird photography, how my settings are done here on the camera body. And first of all, I'm in fully manual mode. You see this here. You also see it on the dial here, the mode dial. I'm in fully manual mode. And the shutter speed I was setting up here was 1/500 seconds, and also in some instances 1/400 seconds. So I really wanted to be in a position to freeze motion of animals, and that's what you should do in bird and in wildlife photography. Sometimes if you have fast moving animals, it's even wise to go to 1/1000 seconds. I was shooting all the footage in the zoo at the widest open aperture of f5.6, and the reason is that even in daylight, if you are shooting into the shadows, ISO value can climb up very quickly. And since I had some other functions activated, which I'm showing in a moment, namely bird recognition and subject tracking for birds, I had no problem shooting this widest open in all images at f5.6. I have a lot of my functions here sitting on customizable function buttons. So for instance, you see I'm here in the autofocus mode on zone, and you see the zone here and how it is catching up with Jennifer here. And here on the button, I have subject detection on for birds. I can also switch subject detection off, but for birds, and that's my example here, I used subject detection on, and I can recall it, it's off, here it's on. And that was very helpful because when shooting these birds, I saw how the autofocus system is recognizing the bird and jumping immediately to the eyes of the bird. You will see this later in the sample images. And that is basically what I had. Here, of course, I had autofocus continuous. You have here single, you have manual, and you have continuous. And I wanted that focus is updating if my subject is moving. And on drive mode here, I was shooting with 8 frames per second. And these are basically my settings. I hope I didn't forget anything, but you will see in the sample images, it really worked very well. And I got sharp and clean footage in these settings, which I just showed to you for birds and animals in the zoo. I will walk you now through sample images, and I will start with my footage from the shooting in the zoo a moment ago. We'll look into the images, discuss them, and then in, let's call it a second section, I want to show you some images where I used this camera lens combination for landscape photography with a perception of compression. And I think they also look very nice. So let's have a look into these images, and then I will, of course, conclude the video very quickly. All right, as said, in terms of landscape sample images, we come to that part later in the discussion of sample images. Let's start with birds and with animals. And I think this is a pretty nice shot. 1/400 seconds, widest open, as I said, at f5.6, ISO 200. And look at that. And I must say the bird recognition in the autofocus settings works really well, even if something is blocking the way. And here is an example for that. You see here the branch of a tree being basically in front of the head, eye, and the pecker of the bird, but it's pinpoint sharp where it's supposed to be pinpoint sharp. And I think this is remarkable. So this bird recognition really works, and the camera is well trained to recognize birds and to also track them if they move. We have another image that's kind of the same as this one here, slightly different perspective, but all sharp and in focus. Look at that. And a little bit of, let's say, cleaning of the pecker would not harm for this fellow here. But everything is sharp and in focus. Here again, looks really good. Look at that. Very nice representation when these birds are sitting in the nest. And I think in general, that is probably the main application for this camera lens combination. Observing birds in a nest or animals in a certain location. I would not want to use this camera for a Formula 1 race with sport cars, because it's just not quick enough for that. You have better camera lens combinations for these type of applications, like a Sony Alpha 1 Mark II, or maybe a Canon EOS R1 or R3, or a Nikon C9 or C8, what have you, but definitely not a medium format camera. But if you are observing animals in wildlife and you want to capture them, in particular with this preset function I showed you with that switch on the lens, this is a really nice camera lens combination for getting some nice shots done. Look at that. And these images are all really good, very sharp and very nice in terms of contrast, micro contrast, sharpness, crispiness, colors come across very nice. So I think this looks really good. Of course, I also wanted, and that was my ambition, to catch birds in flight. And we see here how I tried it, it's not so easy. This is 1/400 seconds. I think I have another shot with 1/500 seconds. There it worked better, but it's a usable image, you know, and these fellows here, they fly pretty fast. Here we have a last one. Well, I think I have a couple of more later, but that's a nice one. How he's looking down at me with my camera and observing what I'm doing here, and look at the level of sharpness and crispness you get with that lens. In terms of birds in flight, here's another one. That's now 1/500 seconds, and I think this looks better than the one I showed you before. This is the one I showed you before, and I think it's kind of sharp, but not really sharp. This one here looks really good to me. And you see, I was catching that bird in flight. No problem at all with this camera lens combination. Here we have another one. Also here, I think that is nicely rendered, looks really good. And I think I have at the very end here a couple of more shots. Let me see if I find them very quickly. Yes, here we go. Here is another one. Also here, look at that. I think it's really nice what this camera lens combination is delivering here. Here is another one with two nests. There is one fellow sitting here, very calm. There's another one sitting here, lazy too. And here we have one even with little baby birds in the nest, which I like. And you see here they are registered and the camera captures all of that. Very nice. Another one, and then a last one in a moment, which is this one here again with these two fellows here. Quite nice. So I think in terms of birds, that's almost it. But if you are a bird photographer and you insist in shooting your birds with a medium format camera, then clearly the GFX100 Mark II with the GF500 is a medium format system you can use. Now here we have a zebra, and that was now inside the zoo. And look at the level of detail. This looks breathtakingly good. So this is a really, really sharp lens that fully delivers. Here another little friend here in the zoo. Let's skip that. Here an elephant. Also quite nice. Look at the texture of the elephant skin. Really sharp, very nice. And here, by the way, you see the brilliant contrast and micro contrast very clearly on that elephant skin. These two fellows are liked here. This one here is kind of smiling. Look at that. But the level of detail you catch, absolutely amazing. And I think this looks really good. Look here. And I think if, you know, you look at the separation of foreground and background here, this is fantastic. It's buttery smooth in the background and pinpoint sharp on the bird in the foreground. Here I was doing 4 shots in a row of the same bird. Let's have a look. Really good. Look at what this fellow here has on his pecker. Quite nice. Then he was looking at me, thinking whether I might be a threat or dangerous to him or her. You know, I'm not so sure if this is a him or a her, pronoun-wise. And look at these images. Very nice. The feathers here, everything is captured in a very sharp and I think quite brilliant way. Look at that. So, concluding on bird photography, this is clearly a camera lens combination I can recommend. It's working. Here we have a couple of more shots. I think this is a bad shot. I like this one much more. Look here at the level of detail. Look at the eyes. Look at the reflection here in the upper part of the eye. Very nice. Here another one. Same scene. Good photos, I think. Good image quality. More animals. Look here. We can be a bit faster. Here they were looking at me. Again, very high level of detail, well-rendered image. This fellow here was taking a bath. You see here a little bit the water around him, splashing. And also this is very nice and very sharp. I cropped in here already, 1/500 seconds, all widest open at f5.6. More animals. Look here, a little bit a dreamy look of that goat or whatever that is. Same image. Staring directly at me into my eyes. Here another bird. I don't really like animals in cages, but that's what it is, of course, if you go into a zoo. And sometimes they have to use cages to keep the animals inside. I personally don't like that a lot, but nevertheless, I wanted to take a nice shot because I think the colors here come across in a very nice way. Look at the contrast of yellow with this azure blue. Looks very nice. You can even see inside here the pecker and you get all the details. Quite nice. This one here I like. It's a very funny fellow. Look here. And you see here the shallow depth of field. You know, the nose is already blurry. The eyes are pinpoint sharp. I have a series of these images. As I said, I was in burst mode, 8 frames per second, and the animal was moving, but the tracking and being sticky with the autofocus on the eyes always worked. Look here. The last one, looking into the sky. Don't know if that fellow is expecting aliens to arrive on planet Earth, but she or he was very focused on looking up into the sky for a while. Flamingos, also here, nice level of detail, and I think that looks good. Another image. This one here I like because of the reflection. Look, here is the axis of symmetry, right here. And then we have here the bird, and here the reflection in the water. Very nice. More flamingos, pinpoint sharp, nice colors, contrast, looks good. Oh, that little fellow again. But here you see how sharp this is and how shallow the depth of field is at f5.6. And again, pay attention to the super smooth and very soft background blurriness. Separation of foreground from background. Look at the totally blurry structure here in the background. Looks really good. Here again, staring at me, shallow depth of field, pinpoint sharp around the eyes. Looks all really good. And I think that's it. That's everything I wanted to show in terms of animal photography, wildlife photography, bird photography. And I think this is very promising. So I was actually surprised to get so many nice shots. And for bird photographers, clearly an asset to have a medium format 44x33mm sensor with a 500mm telelens, which in a full frame equivalent focal length corresponds to about 400mm. And now I want to round this up in terms of image quality by looking into a couple of landscape shots. These images are taken at a location which I showed repeatedly on the channel. It's one of my test locations with a very nice panoramic view over Rapperswil city with the old castle, and cropping in here. This is a panorama stitching here. Looks really good. Look at that. Lots of details. Very nice how the light is captured here in the castle. The reflections in the water across the lake and the other side of the lake with the industrial buildings, apartment buildings here. Looks really good. Here now a 30-second exposure. This was a 9-second exposure and a panorama stitching. This is also panorama stitching at 30-second exposure. A little bit overblown in the highlights here, but very nice. And this is stopped down here to an f14. And it looks, in my opinion, really good. Look at that. Walking through the scene. Everything is captured in a very nice way. I don't think I have to show them all here. A mountain panorama stitching, 417 megapixel. And boy, is this clear and crisp. Looks really good. I really like what I'm seeing here. Look at that. Very, very nice. And you have almost unlimited possibilities if you like in landscape photography the perception of compression, which is exactly what the telelens is doing for you. And I remind you again in the video I advertised back then, where I will post the link down below in the info box. Here, 2.3-second exposure and aggressively stopped down to f20, but I think still no problem with diffraction. And here, look at the other side of the lake. We have here lots of stores, H&M, Coop, C&A, Manor, Migros, Coop. It's all here. It's the Sedam Center. You see this here in the blue engraving. It's a big shopping mall here in that part of Switzerland, and super sharp, super crisp. Looks really nice. Here islands I've shown repeatedly on the channel. Also here, very nice shots. Look at these islands here. It's as clear and crisp as if you would be there live and see it with your naked eyes. It just looks very good when I do my pixel peeping here. And this camera lens combination for, let's call it compressed landscape photography, whatever that is, I tried to clarify it in my video back then, is working very well with that camera lens combination. Look at that. Really nice. Here again, the castle. And I think I made my points, right? You see what's going on here. You have here the highway. Let's crop in, of course. We have here a panorama stitching, 281 megapixel. This is massive in terms of resolution. That's why you have huge cropping in reserves. And I think I made my point, right? So I showed you birds, I showed you animals. as I called it before, my wildlife simulation shooting situation I wanted to achieve here. Then landscape photography, cities, castles, you know, night lights like here, looks all very good. And I think in general I can say the image quality you can achieve with this camera lens combination is really, really good. And I think the lens delivers from all angles. The Fuji GFX system is anyway a really good system. And I think there is always a debate, what should you choose, the Hasselblad X2D Mark II or the Fuji GFX? I personally like them both, but what we see here is really, really good image quality from a 500mm lens in a medium format system. Pretty cool. All right, that's it. That's all I wanted to say with respect to this monster lens, Fujinon GF500mm widest open f5.6. I think it's almost a unique situation that you have such a camera lens combination in photography with a medium format sensor, 44 times 33mm in terms of dimensions, and then an insanely long tele-lens, 500mm on this medium format sensor, full frame equivalent field of view corresponds to close to 400mm, so 396mm, as I said in the specification section of this video. And that is kind of a unique value proposition. And you can use it, as you saw in the sample images, for your advantage in compressed landscape photography. As I mentioned as a side remark, you could use it for product photography with a magnification of 0.2 times. And of course, it's a lens you can use finally in a medium format camera system for wildlife photography. If you go on safari, if you're a bird shooter, if you go to the zoo with the children and want to create some memories, it's good for all these type of applications. So I hope you liked my presentation. If you liked it, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel. There's always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy. And of course, peace out.